Clearly, the regular contestants have been hearing my complaints over the past 2 weeks because, on the first night back, they gave me a very interesting situation. Welcome to the Final Wager. I'm Keith Williams, and my fellow Brooklynite, Karen Ash, is locked in a little tussle with Andy, the poet. Just 800 separates the two of them, and Susan, a distant third, but could play spoiler here depending on what our leader and second place player do. So let's just jump right into this, because this is going to be fun. Karen doubles up. She's in second, so we'll start with her, 21-2. So to cover that, Andy's going to need to wager at least 9,800. Now, if he's wrong with that wager, he's going to be left with 1,600. So to stay above that, we can see that that's 9,000 at most for Karen. And for Susan, that's going to be a maximum of 3,200. Now we're going to look at second and third. What happens if Susan doubles up? She doubles up. You see she's going to have 9,600. Karen can wager up to 1,000 to guarantee that she'll finish above Susan. If she does wager that 1,000 or 999 after we subtract $1 later, she'll be able to cover Andy. So this is what's known as Shor's conjecture. She can wager so as to stay above third place regardless and to cover the first place player in case he wagers nothing or gets it wrong. There's not much else to do here on our first order, so I'm going to switch colors. And we'll go into the second order. What happens if one of these players is thinking about one of these wagers? What should the other players do in response? I wouldn't be too concerned about this 9,000 wager. If Andy wants to cover it, that's still going to put him below both Karen and Susan if he's wrong, so it makes sense to go for the lockout. What about this 3,200 wager out of Susan? Makes sense for now. If she wagers that, she's going to be left with, if she's right, 8,000. So stay above that. Karen could wager no more than 2,600. 2,599 is her proper wager there. Finally, this 1,000 wager out of Karen in case she wants to guarantee she beats Susan. If she's right, she's going to have 11,600. So Andy, to cover that, will need to wager just 200. Now, if you look at this 200 wager, if Karen's scared that Andy's going to do that tiny thing, then she can just wager 2,600 and add a little extra risk against Susan. Might be the better play, maybe not. If Susan, for some reason, is scared that Karen's going to be really savvy and wager this 2,600, then she might as well just wager everything. I would put that as secondary. Of course, she doesn't know how Karen's wagered, so that's kind of a crapshoot. But some players like to take their destiny into their own hands, or at least not wager so that they lose when they could have won it had they wagered more. Our last thing we need to cover is zero wagers. So we'll forget about Susan in this one. And we'll look at Karen and Andy. They're separated by 800. So if Karen wants to cover a zero wager by Andy, as we discussed earlier, she can wager 801. And if Andy, for some reason, doesn't like the category and wants to put the ball in Karen's court, then he could wager no more than 800, 799 tops. And finally, if Karen's afraid that Andy's going to do this, she might consider wagering 1,600 to cover what we call an unsafe wager or a Kolbe-esque or Brackage-esque wager by Andy. Last thing we do is we go through and make sure that we have all of our so anything that's on the minimum side, we add $1. And anything that's on the maximum side, we subtract $1, so it becomes 79, and so on and so forth. I guess one other thing I would point out is that I would cap this amount so as not to fall below Susan. So it's going to be at most 5,800. 57.99. A little bit of math there, very fun. Of course, I enjoy it, and we start with Susan, who missed this very tough clue and wagered everything, which was acceptable had she thought Karen was going to do something in that 2,600 range. Over to Karen, who also missed and wagered everything, which is just not a good wager because there's plenty of other ranges that do the same thing. And she's probably kicking herself, as is Susan, because Andy missed and wagered for the lockout. So he wins with $15.99, less than what Karen makes for being in second, but he does get to come back tomorrow, and he wins at least $1,000 then, so don't feel too bad for him. I hope you'll be back tomorrow, too. On the final wager.